Good afternoon, everyone. Before I introduce the speaker, I'm just going to quickly run through some of the future programs at NMN. On 4th February, there's a seminar by Professor Partho Ghosh, who will be speaking on partition, two phases, instant and long term. On the 5th of February, there's a public lecture, Science, Society and Nature series. Professor Beena Agarwal, University of Manchester, UK. She'll be speaking on governing South Asia's forests. Does women's presence make a difference? On the 6th and 7th of February, there's a conference in association with Dr. Meenakshi Barkataki on diversities and connections. So this all 3 days are booked. Oh, I think there's one on. Oh, that's the conference itself. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. So let me now. Immense pleasure in introducing Professor Jayanta Bandyopadhyay. There is a formal write-up of introducing him, and I could read this, though I must use this occasion to also say that I've had the pleasure of knowing Professor Bandyopadhyay since 1986, when one heard him speak on limestone mining in Doon Valley. And for many of us who were then trying to figure out environmental issues, I think Professor Bandyopadhyay was a huge inspiration. And ever since then, I've been sort of following his work. And I often think that I really produce the footnotes for Professor Bandyopadhyay's work, or at least I hope some of the footnotes for Professor Bandyopadhyay's work on water. So it's an absolute honor for me to be chairing this session. Very briefly, Professor Bandyopadhyay is an engineer from the Indian Institute of Technology of Kanpur. His research formed the basis of a lot of his work subsequently on eucalyptus forestry, limestone mining, something I already mentioned. He looked at traditional engineering in designing of large water projects in the Himalayan rivers. He was the lead author in the global report of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and an expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the area of climate change and water. In 1997, he joined the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and established the Center for Development and Environmental Policy. He retired from IIMC in 2012. He was the president of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics and a fellow of the India-China Institute in New York, in the New School, New York. He's an advisor to the Water Diplomacy Program at Tufts University, USA. He has published more than 140 books and articles, some of which I've read. His recent book, published by Bloomsbury, entitled Environmental Governance, has created an important impact in South Asia. And without further ado, I yield the floor to Professor Bandyopadhyay.
Good afternoon to you all, and thanks to good old friend Rohan, who has been a sort of comrade in the struggle for a more sustainable, more responsible, equitable approach to water, not only in India, but also especially in South Asia. And it's a pleasure to have him here. And I also feel that Dr. Rangarajan, who invited me to deliver this lecture, has also to be away from this meeting for some time because of other commitments. I'm thankful to both of them. And the topic I'll be covering here, I have reworded a little bit than the one which probably has been circulated. The water futures of South Asia, need for ecological water engineering. I am talking of not only our country but the whole region, because water is a connecting sort of link between most of the South Asian countries except Sri Lanka, and the future cannot be just broken across the boundaries because the water connects areas across the political boundaries. And I have to really stress the need for taking a leap forward in water engineering in South Asia if we have to have a more secure water future in the region. That means one of the elements is an ecological water engineering. There are many other elements like an ecologically informed diplomacy, ecologically informed user practices. Those all probably deserve lots of hours of lectures. I have chosen only the issue of water engineering, and not to underestimate the other, especially software aspects of water utilization in this region. So with that caveat, I would like to start this presentation. I have been given about 35 minutes, so I'll try to limit myself within that time period. Now, when we talk of water in South Asia, I will go back a little bit and talk about the real role of Himalaya as the Asia's water tower. Here I talk of not only South Asia, but particularly East Asia and South Asia, which collected together is going to be about half or about 45% of the world population very soon. And they depend very heavily on Himalayan waters. And many Asian countries depend very heavily on the rivers originating in the Himalaya, and the South Asia is the region through which much of the water of the Himalayan rivers flow. For the case of India, about 70% of our total river flows come from the Himalayan river Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna system as well as the Indus. Now, before going into the specifics of water futures in South Asia, I would like to give the immense role played by Himalayan waters in the whole of Asia, and the central dark green area is the upland called Himalaya. Large part of it is, of course, in China as the Tibetan plateau, but large part of the water, the land, in terms of land, large part goes to China, but in terms of water, the large part comes to South Asia. But with that little supply of water, that means the two Himalayan rivers of Yellow River, the Huanghe, and the Yangtze, China is doing wonders. They're very small in terms of flow, but it is the lifeline of Chinese economy. Having given that background, I come to the rivers draining the southern aspect of the Himalaya, that means the southern slope, which is Brahmaputra, Ganga, and Indus. And these three are really the lifeline for South Asia. Now, this is the basin-wise water resources of India, and you don't have to really go anywhere to stress that the Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna is the water supplier of the country. 62% comes from the Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna and about 8% from the Indus, making Himalayan water about 70% of the total river flows in India. You have many rivers in peninsular India, but they are not as large. You can see the whole spectrum on the left side. They are relatively smaller rivers. They are already exploited to the extent of 80 to 90%. And nothing to beat the volume of the Ganges Brahmaputra Meghna. This presentation will focus on the Ganges-Brahmaputra Meghna basin, which is shared by Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, and Nepal. Of course, there is a small part of Myanmar also. It's mentioned on the margin because it's not a very major player. And the Ganga-Brahmaputra Meghna basin carries about 1100 BCM of water. It is the third largest flow after Amazon and Congo. This is the third largest in the flow of water. If the precipitation in the basin was distributed uniformly in space and time, water engineering would be much simpler in South Asia. Of course, we need water more or less uniformly for human domestic needs, industrial needs, and typical irrigation requirements, which may be different from that of the high amount of monsoon precipitation. Now, the responsibility of water engineering, traditional water engineering, has been to adjust the temporal and spatial inequity in precipitation, moderate it, in fact, twist the arms of the natural precipitation to fit the human requirements. That has been the main objective of water engineering in South Asia. Now, why I took GBM, Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna, because it is really a representative of South Asia. It has whole of Nepal, it has whole of Bhutan, it has 80 to 85% of Bangladesh within its basin, very large part of densely populated North India, and very large part of the Tibetan area of China. And we forget about the Tibetan area because as of now, in South Asian analysis, the contribution of Tibet is not very, very large, and China has not entered South Asian water scenario in a big way. Though a lot of noise have been made, but in terms of actual water contribution, South Asia doesn't really receive much from Tibet. Now, in the basin, I was talking about the spatial and temporal inequity. The precipitation is highly skewed in space and time. The Ganga-Brahmaputra Meghna basin is it is the third largest carrier of water, but it is the largest carrier of suspended sediment load in the world, which goes to about 2.9 million tons of sediment. And in addition, about 750 million people live in the basin, making it the most densely populated river basin in the world. So you have a lot of extremes in this. You have large flow, you have the largest sediment transportation, you have the densest human density in any river basin in the world. They all need a lot of water. And when you go into managing water in this basin, all these factors will have to be brought in details. Now, what is our availability in South Asia? I have got a map of precipitation over India. You can see definitely that the corners in northeast is pretty rich. The whole western slope of the Western Ghat is also pretty rich, but their utilizable volume is very low. They go straight back to the Arabian Sea. But the Himalayan rivers, here you have a gap in Nepal, but Nepal is the source of several very large rivers for Ganga. So Nepali water is important for Ganga also. You have the Kosi, which is a major tributary to Ganga. You have Bagmati, which is not very large, but it carries quite a bit of water. Then you have Gandak. Then you have the whole Sharda or Mahakali, whatever be the name. And they all put in a lot of water into Ganges or Ganga. So the whole Himalaya is a basic water machine for the Gangetic Plain, starting from the western limit of the basin to the eastern limit of the basin in Bangladesh and the northeastern parts of India. But we talked of the temporal and spatial iniquity. Here is the flow in these two main rivers, Ganga and Brahmaputra. When the monsoon arrives, you get a huge amount of flow. When the monsoon goes, the flow immediately goes down. And this is something which our engineers often do not address adequately. I will come to that in detail so when we talk of the ecological needs for ecological engineering. The other thing is I was talking of is that the Ganga-Brahmaputra system carries world's largest sediment load, suspended sediment load. This is at the origin of the Ganga, at the Surajkund at Gangotri. You can definitely see that the water is not water. Water is also colored by huge sediments, and these sediments in Gangotri is not coming from human-induced pollution or something else. It is the natural water. And you can also see the energy in it. I will come to this description or redefinition of water in the Himalayan rivers in a few minutes, but please remember this photograph. Now this sediment, which is there in the Gangotri, travels all the way down to the Sundarbans and keeps the mangroves alive. You can see the color of water. It's also the same sediment which originates here, goes here. And this is the Sundarbans ecosystem, which depends on the supply of not only fresh water, but also the sediment that fresh water carries. And the sediment is also needed beyond the estuaries and the mangrove forests because it is creating continuously new land south of the coastline. And the debris of the Himalaya naturally travels to a distance of about 1,000 kilometers at the bottom of the ocean to cross the level where Sri Lanka exists in our map. So this huge amount of debris is not only used at the mangrove forests of Sundarbans, but also far down, and continuous regeneration or generation of new land is taking place. And this is one mechanism through which Sundarban is fighting the effect of global warming in the form of sea level rise. If there is enough sediment load, new land is being created, otherwise the sea level rise is going to eat into the land which already exists. So these are basic ecological processes of the river, starting from the origin in Gangotri to the end. One can talk for 5 hours on this riverine ecosystem, starting from the origin in the Himalaya to the Bay of Bengal, but I have just mentioned in brief the whole process. Now I come to the whole issue of who live here. And the population of about 750 million, it's constantly growing. You can see the 1990s density map, and you can see the 2005 population density map of the Ganga basin. I am not talking of Brahmaputra basin here. And you can see continuous intensification of human habitat in the Ganga basin. And this process is going on. The paradox is that the Ganga-Brahmaputra-Meghna basin, it contradicts the usual global view that rural poverty is proportional to scarcity of water. Economists put a price on something when there is scarcity. But here there is, economics fails to address this particular issue of poverty which coexists with abundance or overabundance of water. And this is the challenge which South Asia specifically has to address. It's not an African situation where scarcity or non-availability of water and poverty can become a linear process. So this is a very different type of analysis that we need in South Asia. Now, what is traditional engineering has done to us? And traditional engineering interventions were guided by because you go back to the challenge that availability is skewed both in space and time, requirement is almost uniform, and in terms of irrigation, it is specific to the irrigation requirement periods. So what is done is construction of storage dams and supply augmentation, extension of canal irrigation, which gave some positive results, definitely in the earlier periods, and hydropower generation. Now, this is the more recent intervention into the Ganga-Brahmaputra-Meghna basin. I will talk about the degree of this intervention towards the end of my presentation. Hydropower generation to support the rapid economic growth, and you know that both China and India are under pressure to reduce the carbon dioxide-based energy consumption. Theoretically, in a very theoretical way, hydropower could also be sold as CO2-free, carbon dioxide-free, but I will say it is very heavily dependent on carbon dioxide under the Himalayan river systems. I will describe why and how. So as a result of all these constructions, our irrigation has expanded. If you see what we had in the immediately aftermath of our independence, a very small part of the total irrigation potential was available, the green part. And if you come to more recent times in the last decade, end of last decade, you can see that almost 75% of that has been covered up. So we have a reasonably successful expansion of irrigation per se, and of course you know that Green Revolution technology and others protected us from food insecurity. This is a success, but again it's a success at a particular time. I'll come to its ecological lingering effects which have not been accounted for. You can see this is the Ganga basin, and the brown lines are the canals. And the canals that come out of this hugely expanded irrigation system, because the largest irrigation network is in the Ganga basin and the Indus basin. The blue lines are the rivers, but in Ganga basin, rivers are outsmarted by the canals. You can see canal water reaches far more areas than the rivers, and that is the purpose of reducing the spatial inequity. If you do not have water, take a canal from a river. So Ganga basin is probably the most intensely canalized and irrigated area. Now, the traditional water engineering has identified India's annual utilizable water as 1122 billion cubic meters, out of which something like 660 BCM is from surface and the rest is from groundwater. This is our kitty as far as the engineering reports of the Ministry of Water Resources is concerned, though such national level estimates are of little use in the case of local water availability and needs. If Birla has a lot of money and a person in the streets of Delhi has no money, the national average will show we have a lot of money. Similarly, if you make a national average of Meghalaya and Rajasthan, we'll be pretty comfortable. But water is, I always take this opportunity to say that water is not as liquid as cash. You can take a bank account in Cherrapunji and issue a check in Rajasthan, it will work. But you cannot say there is a lot of rain there, so obviously I will get it here. So water is not as liquid as cash. And now remember 11 and 22, the magic figure. Again, the magic projections of the ministry is that by 2010 we will have a total demand of 710. 2025 we have a total demand of 843. And by 2050, this is where by the turn of the half century, we will cross the total availability. Our total demand will overtake the total availability. But these figures, as I said, you cannot make a national figure of water. You cannot, it is not transferable that easily, though a lot of efforts are going on through the interlinking of rivers to make water more liquid, more fluid. Of course, it cannot touch the liquidity of cash. So, even under traditional engineering, we have to think, what after 2050? Where will you get your water from? What will be the source of your water security? What will be the water future for South Asia? And this is where I am going to address in the next few minutes. What future with traditional engineering and business as usual? Water demand in India is going to be high, and what is the potential of, again, controlling floods and provisioning of more water supplies? Whenever you go to an engineering department, they will say, oh, we'll store more water and provide you with off-season supplies. We'll store more water from the monsoon floods and provide you. Now, can engineering offer any solution with enhanced storage? Firstly, can it control floods? Now, here I am going to show you, this is the most flood-prone areas, of course, at the foothill of the Himalaya. And look at this. For Ganga, the potential volume of water, total flow, and the storage. The green one is present storage. The deep blue one is medium-sized dams built, and the light green is all big dams put together. Kosi, Karnali, these are the big dams, and to some extent, Chisapani, Karnali, Kosi, and Mahakali. These three are the big dams. And you can say that out of the 500 BCM of flow of Ganga, they can contain 120, 130. So what will happen to the 370 BCM? So floods cannot be controlled by dams. If any engineer tomorrow tells we will control floods by dams, we have to get into this figure. This figure is taken from World Bank's South Asia Water Initiative report, and they take a clear position that floods will always remain. You do not have enough storage in the Himalaya to control floods. They can, of course, provide some amount of additional water, these storages. Now, South Asia's water scarcity needs new concepts and institutions, because you can neither stop floods, you can neither stop the 1122 BCM cannot be, it is not an elastic process that you can keep pulling the total supply. So we have physical scarcity, we have to address the whole issue of floods. What do we do? So this is where South Asia's water security needs new concepts and institutions. A new water science, especially for the Himalayan rivers, has to grow based on the local hydrometeorological database. A new water engineering that is informed of the ecosystem processes and services in all parts of the basin. Now, those of you who know the history of water engineering education, it is based largely on the original British Engineering College, I think established in 1960s at Roorkee, which later became Roorkee University, then became IIT Roorkee, and has been the center of India's water engineering education. And that tradition of British hydrology has remained. Now, here I am putting the annual hydrograph of two rivers. One is the Yamuna and the Thames. Yamuna at Delhi and the Thames. The Thames is the dark one. It's the whole spatial and temporal iniquity comes here, that Thames doesn't offer any serious temporal iniquity, whereas Yamuna is providing us with a serious challenge of temporal iniquity. Now, the hydrology and water engineering based on the bottom part is unable to understand the requirements of engineering which the blue part expects, demands for successful intervention. But what we have done is to keep these rivers data, flow data, as a national confidential data. So you cannot do research. You cannot create new knowledge on the Himalayan rivers. You continue working on old knowledge, do not allow, because you cannot publish the data which you use. Those who have experience of working on the Himalayan rivers, which provide us 70% of our water, we do not have authority to publish data or research output which is based on the use of detailed hydrological data of these rivers. So the science of Himalayan rivers have remained in a very, very underdeveloped stage. Now, if it is a national priority to keep water science underdeveloped, I do not know what is the reason. It's of course told that it is a national priority to keep the data confidential for political reasons. But as a scientist, I would say that if you do not know your rivers, how are you going to protect it even internally? Now, this is one aspect. Other aspects I am coming. This is the spatial iniquity. This is where people are struggling 8 hours to 9 hours in a day to keep water on the top of their head. And if you go to eastern India in monsoon, people are struggling to keep water below their feet all the time. And this wonderful, tough challenge of the spatial iniquity is very, very important in our case. I had shown to you the temporal iniquity. This is the spatial iniquity. And these are not thoroughly understood, studied, and internalized in policy. Now, South Asia's water security again needs new concepts. I have given a concept of science, a concept of engineering, and a new vision of looking at rivers in general, and the Himalayan rivers in particular, that they are not merely a stock of water to be stored and diverted as per market demands. They are interlinked flows, ecologically interlinked flows of water, sediment, and energy. If you neglect one, your project of the other will be upset. And that is where I will come to the last part of my presentation. Now, this is the Himalayan river, and its flow, like the Ganga, this is a Himalayan river in the Indus system near Manali, and you can see the energy, you can see the sediment from the color, and of course it is a flow of water. If you underestimate one of them, and usually hydrologists of the British origin, they underestimate the sediment part because European rivers do not have much sediment. They have very little energy, and something the Himalayan rivers have is far, far larger than in the European rivers, of course, both have water. So when you take the European approach to river engineering, you are already in disadvantage with respect to particularly the sediment. Now, this will need to lead to a new understanding of economic values of ecosystem services of rivers, like biodiversity conservation, fish production, groundwater recharge, and of course transportation. Our Water Resource Ministry is fully committed to irrigation. They do not understand biodiversity conservation. They do not understand fish production. They do not really give much importance to the groundwater role of surface water flows. The rivers is given importance. When you talk of irrigation, they say groundwater irrigation has to take from surface water. But their interaction is not really given the theoretical importance. And of course, transportation is not the matter of water resource engineering. Transportation is a matter of Ministry of Transport. So as if ships can flow or boats can flow without water. So these are various dimensions of our rivers which have been very systematically kept outside. If you go through the National Water Policy of 2012, which should have internalized many things, you will still see irrigation is the ultimate objective of the water policy execution. So there is a new task of making a new policy, and the task is very, very important that water policy has to have a sediment policy. If you do not have a sediment policy, your water policy is going to be ineffective. And then I come to this enormous amount of dam building activities. This is the proposed dams in the northeast. In Arunachal alone, we have something like 300 so-called run-of-the-river projects coming up. In Hindi, there is a kahawat, Ganga ko aviral bahne do. I have just added 3 more letters to it. I said, Ganga ko aviral bahne do, sirf tunnel ke jariye se. If you go to Alagnanda, if you go to Mandakini, if you go to any of the northeastern tributaries of Brahmaputra, you will see that there is a series of cascade dams and hydropower projects. The output of one hydropower goes within a kilometer as the input for the next hydropower station. So the whole river is tunnelized. Whether it is Alagnanda, Mandakini on the west, and fortunately the Nepal dams have not yet come up. Nepal is not in a position to take a decision, I believe. But if you then come to Tista in the east side, Tista onwards, all the way you can see up to Lohit. Lohit is the last eastern river coming from Myanmar through Arunachal into Brahmaputra. It is full of cascade dams. And they are all hydropower generation cascade dams. Now, 2 things I want to inquire, whether these have been examined in the environmental clearance of these hundreds of dams. One is, where is the sediment going to go? Because even if you call it a run of the river, no hydropower project can work with sedimented water. You have to separate the sediment, and the clean, absolutely white water has to go into the plant. So, the largest sediment carrier of the world, the Ganga-Brahmaputra system, and here I am talking of Brahmaputra, which has about 600 million tons of annual sediment, where will it go? And this is where I am coming to the question that very soon, 20, 30 years, all these projects will be filled up with sediment, and then they will ask for money to dredge the sediment and transport where? Where will they transport it? So the CO2 that those vehicles that will transport hundreds and hundreds of million tons of sediment will not be in practice in the calculation of hydropower, but in reality it will be. If I create a hydropower dam which creates sediments, and if I need to burn fuel to carry those sediments technically up to Bay of Bengal or wherever, that CO2 account has to go against those hydropower dams. So who said Himalayan hydropower is clean? We have to calculate that CO2 which in 30 years or 40 years' time will be emitted to transport the sediments. Otherwise, if you do not clear of the sediments, these power plants will be out of functioning very soon. So this map is very important, and this is the more funny part of our hydropower revolution. This resembles the annual hydrograph of, yes, I'm through in 2-3 minutes, annual hydrograph of Ganga and Brahmaputra I had shown. But this is the daily hydrograph of the Siang River, or Lohit River. Lohit is the easternmost. So the 365 times collapse of the hydrological cycle. So the fish is told, you come at 5 p.m., you will need some water, we'll give some water. 11 p.m. we'll take that water out. So 11 p.m. to 5 p.m. you leave without much water. And then come back and have a lot of fun in the high flow. So this is monsoon occurring every day, because hydropower operates at the peak period, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. And this is when the stored water will be thrusted out of these dams. So this will create a desert out of water, because it will have no life. Fish life will be dead, because the fish life is not accustomed to a daily monsoon fluctuation and daily starvation of water supply. So what will happen to the fishing all the way down in Brahmaputra if Lohit onwards up to Tista, all the dams start delivering this water at 5 p.m. and stopping at 10 or 11 p.m. I am not going to go in details. These are matters of assessment. So a new priority of efficient use, now I am talking of, this was the supply side, the dam side, the environmental impact side. What is most important is, of course, a new priority for efficient use and demand management, especially with respect to efficiency in irrigation. We have a 30% efficient irrigation system. Israel has a 70% efficient irrigation system. China has already reached 50%. In our water policy, we do not make any target of how to take 30 to 40 or 45. If we do that, enormous amount of water will be available for many other things. Second is a high priority for development of regional climate models. Everyone makes prediction about, oh, this will happen, that will happen to Ganga, this will happen. But we South Asians do not have a climate model that functions properly in the Himalayan landscape. We do not have that regional climate model. At the IITM Pune, it is only at the very, very nascent stage of development. Our models are imported from US, Japan and UK, applied on the Himalaya, where they have no sort of correlation. And we are, somewhere it is giving less rainfall, somewhere in the same area another model is giving more rainfall, we are confused. If we want to be serious about our water future, we have to be very serious about climate modeling. Okay, I am almost through with my presentation. Now, India's national water policy does not say much about the Himalayan rivers. Very interestingly, it's international, we will not talk much. But we work most on the Himalayan rivers. 400 dams are coming in, if you take Alagnanda, Mandakini, Mahakali or Sharada, all the way down to Lohit. So intervention is made, but in the policy, no statement is made. Very interesting. I will cut short quickly now because of my interest in the discussion. The last part is, if we ignore sediment, you will not be able to understand shifting of the rivers. This is the Rennell's pioneering work, mapping of the Ganga basin, 1750 to 1768. The most interesting feature is it shows Brahmaputra and Ganga, they do not meet. They go to the Bay of Bengal separately. Today we know that Brahmaputra and Ganga meet in central Bangladesh and down. So Brahmaputra has shifted about 200 kilometers to come closer to Ganga. Earlier it was meeting Meghna and draining straight into the Bay of Bengal. And there are enormous examples. Kosi has shifted from west to east by 200 kilometers. It has gone from the Ganga sub-basin to the Brahmaputra sub-basin, not Kosi, Tista. And Kosi has shifted 250 kilometers to the west. So if we do not give sediment the due place in our water science, what is happening to the Farakka barrage? Because of the sediment, the river is finding way straight into Bangladesh through other distributaries. And Farakka barrage, if there is sedimentation at the barrage bottom, it will be like a dry dock, it will be a dry barrage. So engineering is failing. And that is why engineering has to talk of sedimentation. And I thank you very much for your attention.